And because things are so crazy in our lives, everybody, I think included, that I am going to be sharing this, but I'm sharing it from the car, but I'm not driving. I'm stationary. And I know Jen is going to be joining us, but also going to be in a car in a few minutes. So she won't be on camera. But I am glad we've been able to get this meeting set up. And I know it's been a while since we met. We have a pretty broad agenda. It's pretty general agenda, 3 points, two of which really are very overlapping. But I think to just sort of summarize where we're at is that I know I'm happy, Melissa, that you're here today. I don't know if there's others from DAS here, but I know that people have questions about the program and the way the HVAC systems will be set up. So I think if it's all right, I'll ask Cameron to help a little today with keeping a list of the attendance of those that are here and participating. And then if I miss seeing a hand up, don't hesitate to help me out, Cameron, or just jump in if we're not such a big group today. I think we can handle that. So maybe it would be good to just get started right away. So the first item on the agenda is to specifically ask DAS questions that folks have about the way the program will work as now part of the school's construction program. So I don't know if you want to give us an overview, Melissa, or if you want to just take questions.
Thanks, Senator Kushner. And I'm happy to give the group an overview. Good afternoon,
Great.
Senator, Representative Leeper, and members of the working group. I'm happy to give an overview of our bill, which is House Bill 6922. In sections 1 and 4 of the bill, move the standalone HVAC grant program into the category of school construction projects that the commissioner, or school building projects that the commissioner can approve administratively on a monthly basis. So during the past 2 rounds of the program, we had received feedback from districts and from you all that the application process was difficult to navigate and that the timelines were restrictive. So by moving this program into the category of administratively approved grants, this would provide a long-term, non-competitive, unlimited funding source for upgrade, installation, replacement of HVAC systems within school districts. And as I mentioned, instead of an annual application, districts could apply on a rolling monthly basis. This is the same application process that the districts currently use for time-sensitive projects such as roof replacements. And so there's many benefits to this proposal, both for school districts as well as for the state. Since districts can apply on a monthly basis, they can apply within a timeline that works well for them, which will hopefully increase access to the program. They're also using a process that they're very familiar with, which will reduce administrative burden on their side, but will also reduce administrative burden on our side, on the state side. And unlike how the program has operated to date, in this model, the districts will know the status of their application within the same month that they applied. And if for some reason it's declined, they can come back the next month. That being said, our team does work with the school district to provide feedback, and they do have usually 5 business days to update any of their missing application requirements. And then last thing that I want to reiterate that I already mentioned is that this provides a long-term, non-competitive funding source for the grant program. So thank you all for the opportunity to give an overview of the bill, and happy to answer any questions for the group.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. So now we'll take questions. If you just want to raise your hands, I am able to look at the screen. Okay, I don't see any hands yet. Come on, I know people have questions about this. Okay, Matt, cool.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Melissa. Great explanation. Currently, the statutes we have in place for the grant program as it exists require DAS to revisit any denied applications in 25 and 26. And so I'm wondering if that's those provisions would still remain in place if the program as it exists gets modified as the proposal suggests.
Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to answer that question. We don't have any wording in place to remove those provisions. That being said, I do want to share that we have reviewed all the grants that have been denied, and the applications that were denied were because they were incomplete and the district would have to reapply. Those that were denied in the first round of the grant program had the opportunity to reapply in the second round. And I'm happy to share that of the 38 districts that were declined in the first round, 23 did reapply in the second round. In the second round of the program, we did provide technical assistance to any applicants that submitted incomplete applications to give them feedback on what was missing. And we also gave them time to submit missing materials. But in many cases, the districts did not have their local share of funding. And by statute, districts are required to put up their local share. When it comes to the second round, only 7 districts were declined in the second round. And we worked with every single one of them to see if we could get their application to a complete status. But under this legislative proposal, districts can reapply. And so we don't have any wording in place to remove that provision that you mentioned.
Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, next up, I see Lou.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Melissa. We also we appreciate this proposal, and we also appreciate the exclamation. Couple quick questions. One of them is just, and forgive me because I've educated myself a little bit on the school construction projects program, and the information that's on the website is helpful. There is just some questions just about in terms of how much funding is available on an annual basis, and how do the priority list projects differ from the non-priority list in terms of the money aspect? I know that there's a difference there with respect to how they're approved and this kind of thing, but I guess the concern is there a cap on projects that we need to be aware of? And then it's a two-part question, if I may. And then in our previous meeting, when this idea was floated, I think it was John Elsesser who raised a question about a concern, having worked through the school building construction projects grant in the past. John's comment was along the lines of, if your building is out of compliance, whether it be ADA compliance or something like that, you may not be able to access those funds. Or you may not be, eligible to get approved. Does this address that? Do you still have that? Is that still a problem or a potential kind of pitfall in the non-priority list?
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lou. So your first question was, is there a cap on the projects? No, there is no current cap on the projects. And as our proposal was written, this would pull the HVAC projects into the non-priority list. So it wouldn't be related to the priority list. The non-priority list is a list of administratively approved projects that the commissioner can approve once a month. We don't have a cap on that amount. The reason that they're in the non-priority list is, from my understanding, is because the non-priority list lists out specific projects that fall into it, such as roof replacements, which are more time sensitive. So as far as I know and our team knows, there's no cap on the non-priority list. So I hope that helps answer your first question. Regarding the ADA compliance, to be honest, I'm not sure of that answer, but I'm happy to follow up with our team and get you an answer to that question.
And before I lose the mic, are you able to give us a sense of what is the average funding that's available for those projects, or is there a ballpark that you've been around over the last few years? We're just trying to get a sense of what kind of availability there will be year to year. Thank you.
I'm just pulling up. So it looks like in fiscal year 24, we awarded 29 non-priority list applications for a total project cost of 60 million. In fiscal year 23, we awarded 25 non-priority list applications for a total project cost of 55 million. And it's we don't have a great number for the average because it's a very large open-ended authorization. There's no cap on funding for the non-priority list applications. So school districts have a need, they can apply to us between the 1st and the 10th of the month. Our team reviews those applications. If they meet all the requirements, they move forward for a grant commitment. And then the application is committed on the DIS side. There's no specific amount.
That's really helpful. Thank you for indulging.
Of course.
Thank you, Lou. So back to Matt.
So mine's kind of a follow-up to Lou's question. So 60 million last year and 55 million the year before, and our grant programs have put out over 200 million in the couple of rounds that we've done, I believe. So if that kind of stayed the course and you were at 100 million a year additional that hasn't hit the program before, and I don't expect you to necessarily know the answer to this, but my guess is that would raise a lot of eyebrows on the governor's office if normally you're spending 60 and now you're spending 160 or more. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Matt. I know they're aware of this proposal and their support from the governor's office for this proposal. We would likely work with OPM and OTG as those, if those amounts increased. But I'll also point out that since this is on a monthly basis and allows school districts to apply for these grants as needed, it means that there might not likely, and we don't know, but there might not be an influx of 100 million in grants at once. It might be over time, so that the school districts, they have a project that they need to start in June. They start it in June 2025 or next June, so it might not be an influx all at once. But we don't really know until we get started with this program. So I don't want to just presume, but I'm just throwing that out there that the money might be pulled over a longer period of time.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, and I see Joni Amato.
Yeah, I don't know if this is kind of answered in you saying that there's no cap, but if it does become where there's an influx of projects, is there some system in place that gives priority to the lower income districts that are maybe on a higher need? Or is that kind of built in when you're saying no cap?
Thanks, Joni. I think that's built in when we say there's no cap, but we are open to any recommendations.
And so following along, Joni, were you done? Okay, following along those lines, the same formula that is used currently for school construction is the formula that will be used for these projects.
Yeah, is that a question, Senator Kushner?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was. I'm sorry. Yes, that was supposed to be a question.
So the same formula, which has already applied to the grant program as we ran it over the past few years, the formula that determines the reimbursement rate for school districts, that will also be applied going forward if this proposal was to move forward and we were to pull the grant into our administratively approved school building projects, then that reimbursement rate formula would be applied. That reimbursement rate formula determines the amount that a school district needs for their local share. And that formula is a statutory formula. So our team works with the State Department of Education, I believe, to determine that formula. It's posted on our website, or not to determine the formula, but to figure out the rates based off the formula. And it's based on the ANGLIC, which is the Adjusted Equalized Net Grand List Capita, which is a measure of wealth from SDE, as well as many other factors, to determine the reimbursement rate for the district, which then determines the district's local share. So essentially what I'm saying here is that the wealthier districts are going to have to put up more money for their local share, and the less wealthy districts are going to have less money that they're going to have to put up for their local share in order to apply for the grant program. And that was in place before, and that's still going to apply going forward as well.
And along the same lines, yeah, that was what I expected. Along those same lines, and I don't think this happened within the grant program, but has happened within the priority list programs. And maybe I've answered my own question. When we have, I know we've done notwithstanding language in the legislature to address sometimes school districts that even though we have the formula, that we need to enhance the formula in order to provide resources for a much needed project in a district. And that has applied actually to, I know it has applied to, for instance, a roof that might not be under statute eligible for replacement, but there are reasons to enact notwithstanding language to address a need. Would that also apply in some cases for districts that have financial difficulty meeting the needs of the district?
I'll say we, DAS, do not enact the notwithstanding language, so I would leave it up to the legislature.
Yeah. Well, I know you didn't do that, but I meant I've seen that in, there's notwithstanding language we do it every year for certain projects. So I assume this would fall into the same category. If there was a district that had a real need, has established a need for HVAC system and they don't have the resources to put it in, and it is something that's absolutely essential, I would imagine there could be assistance. That's all I'm saying. If we're treating it the same way as we treat other projects.
I'll respond and say that we'll leave that up to you.
That sounded like a question. It sounded the same, but it wasn't. It was a statement. Other questions? I don't see any other hands on this topic.
I'll just say thanks for the opportunity to give an overview of this. And if anyone has any questions offline or wants us to walk you through it, we would be happy to do that. So thank you all.
Well, I think it really helps that you've been part of this group since we formed the working group, because the relationships have been established and we've relied heavily on DAS in the past in answering questions we have about, how do we make the most of our resources to provide this much needed facility improvement for our schools. And you guys have been a huge partner in this since the beginning. I think there was some reservations about seeing the money moved from a situation where we had a dedicated pool of bonding money, or in some cases it was ARPA money that was dedicated to this purpose. And I think there's some nervousness about not having a specified amount. But as you describe the program, I think, it sounds to me like there's some real advantages for the school districts in terms of their ability to apply. And hopefully, we'll see that bear out in the coming years so that we can feel confidence that we're still really dedicating ourselves to solving the problems of HVAC, which we know are critical to creating a good learning environment and a good teaching environment or working environment. So, but I think there is a certain nervousness that I've detected, and you being here and answering those questions is really important. So thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Anything else? I don't see anybody else having a hand up at this time. So, yep, Matt.
Thank you, Senator. I actually wanted to ask you, so you mentioned special circumstances in which a district that was in need was able to get additional assistance. So would that be something that a district would have to apply under something special? Did that come from the legislature, or was that language that you're talking about through DAS?
It's language that comes from the legislature.
But that would be discretionary up to DAS commissioner at that point?
No, it's done by the legislature on projects.
So it would be specific to a project.
Absolutely.
Oh, I see. Thank you. That clarifies it for me.
Yeah, I'll give you an example.
I
we built a new high school and built out a new high school in Danbury, and we got notwithstanding language to improve the reimbursement rate so that we could there was a desperate need because of overcrowding and, limited resources in Danbury and its Alliance district. So it was part of a notwithstanding language in the legislature. And it's very specific to a project, it's not changing the formula for a school district. It's very specific to a given project. That's been my experience. And I've seen it in other districts too. I saw it in New Fairfield when we built the new high school and added on to tore down an elementary school and added on additional classrooms to the elementary school.
So in that instance, and forgive me for trying to just make sure I understand, a district would apply through the normal means and then petition the legislature as well to say, hey, we need some special circumstances for this one.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
And Melissa, you've probably seen it. If I got it wrong, then please correct me. I'm just doing this based on my experience.
I think it depends on the situation. So we've seen in some situations a district applies through the normal means, and then there might be some changes such as the reimbursement rate after the fact. We've also seen situations in which their legislature provides a district or districts with notwithstandings, and then the district technically applies after the fact. So I hope that helps answer your question, or I might have made it even more confusing for you, but maybe I've shown that there's just a whole host of possibilities when it comes to notwithstandings, but we leave that up to the legislature.
Thank you.
So any other questions? Okay, John.
Can you hear me here?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I got on a little bit late because I was having some problems logging in because I've changed my email address in retirement.
I was channeling you, John. I was channeling your thoughts. I do kind of want to ask the time frame here. If this law goes into effect or is adopted this session, are we losing a whole year of grants?
I don't know what the effective date is being proposed. You know, Melissa?
It's effective from passage.
Okay.
So
if you already have something in the works, would it be amended? I know there haven't really been applications for this round, but for a round, But, you know, the school construction grant process takes a while. You know, it's a couple of years. So I'm just wondering, are we losing a whole year for the towns that didn't get funded last time? Is there a transition planned that towns that weren't funded last time could have a chance at money, and this goes into effect the following year? Or am I just wrong?
We're
But-
planning, if this was to move forward, it would be effective from passage, and then districts would have the opportunity to apply between the 1st and the 10th of the month for the next month. And so what I was saying a little bit earlier is that this category of projects, which is called our non-priority list, is administratively approved projects. Our team approves the projects within the same month that they are applied for. And my understanding is the focus is to move them along a little bit faster than the priority list projects, which can be much larger, a renovation, a new building. That's a whole different category of projects.
And John, I think it's important to tell John about what Melissa said, was that if an application is made and is not is denied in a given month, they're allowed to reapply.
Yes,
So,
that's
it sounds like
excellent.
that's an advantage to this new approach too, which should then be advertised, because unlike the other ones where you kind of have to wait to, here's your window of opportunity, which may come once a year. If you're taking applications monthly, that's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Because you know, you have to have the money somewhat approved, and that process takes time too. So I would market that this is a approach could move things faster. And then I'm going to just share one last experience. We're still working on a Coventry High School project, and I'm just venting right now. Eversource is horrible to deal with. I've been waiting for Transformer.
No one has ever said a bad word about Eversource. I'm so
No,
surprised.
never. I've been waiting for a Transformer, and I can't. The systems are all installed, and we can't test them because I need a Transformer. And I'm in my like 8th month. So just letting you know that sometimes it's out of our hands on whether we can comply with deadlines because outside parties are independent.
I
So
had
that
the
was
same
venting. Thank you.
same experience, so I can commiserate with you.
Well, I'm glad we had this meeting because if for no other reason, to give you guys an opportunity to vent, because I'm sure it's really frustrating.
It's healthy.
Catharsis.
It's healthy.
It's healthy, but I believe now the ball is in our legislative court on that, as far as the Eversource deal. Because my feeling is that we're getting bombarded with charges and fees and so forth that we don't need. But it's on another topic and another day. And
Yeah, unfortunately, a legislature before I got there bound us by contract to some of the big hits that we're feeling now. So we're talking about, I didn't come until 2019, and that big part of that deal was done. And to the, I do want to remind people, this has been a big topic, and it's not necessarily the topic of today's meeting. If we get off on Eversource, we may never get back to the rest of the business that we have today. So I'll hold back. Any other questions about the proposal to change the methodology for HVAC programs, HVAC systems in our schools?
If I might give one quick comment, I know I've co-opted a lot of this time, but I'll be very short. When I testified about this on Wednesday, one of the things that I brought up was based on the amount of initially committed funds to what was already spent on IAQ and the grants, there's a difference. And in moving the program into the non-priority list, which I think is a good idea, I think that we should also consider any money that could potentially be left that was already committed. I know that DAS had said at one point that there wasn't enough money to run another round of grants, but that doesn't mean that it was exhausted. So I think it would be wise to look at how much was committed, how much was used, and have a good accounting of that, because there's a lot of things related to IAQ that are not necessarily just a project improvement for one particular municipality or one particular school that could potentially benefit from any leftover funding. There's certain things that could be done that can affect everyone. Things like we did with the air filtration with UConn, right? So that came out of grant funding monies, but that was earmarked for something that was going to benefit everybody. I worry that we might lose that opportunity for things that are not specific projects by rolling into this program. Not that I don't think the program's a good idea, but I think that we shouldn't do that at the expense of being able to earmark and direct funding that will directly impact everyone. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I think that the way the legislation, as I recall, we passed last year, we extended this working group to 2030, I believe. And so I think, Matt, that gives us the opportunity to continue these discussions. And if there are programs that we think would benefit everyone, like what we did with UConn, and I'm glad that's moving forward. I think that this is a place where we have an avenue to discuss those and help construct proposals for the legislature. So, you know, I'm glad we had the foresight to keep this group going. For that reason, if no other. Maybe we should move, the next 2 points on the agenda are both about recommendations, and I think we can just meld them into one. And I know there have been some thoughts given to recommendations for legislative action this separate and apart from the grant system. And I wanted to open the floor for that so that we can, you know, be proactive and start thinking about it early. It's not early. I mean, we're actually deep into the session, but we still, I think, have time that we could, if we have recommendations, that we could find a vehicle to move those through the process.
Yeah, we have some ideas. I know that the first one, so as I think most of you know, we have a coalition of union, nonprofit, and trades groups that meet on this topic and discuss what some of those recommendations. I think probably the first one that I hope everyone on this call will agree with is to address the issue of the effective dates for the 5-year HVAC evaluation. And so I'm probably going to screw this up, but the last update said something to the effect, what we were trying to do was to make it so that school districts could stagger, do 20% of their inspections a year over the course of 5 years. And we did that, but the way that was drafted was essentially, it was that the 5-year inspection could not start until a date certain in 2026. And so we'd like to address that so that anyone who's already done their 5-year inspections, so that those will be counted. And if they haven't done their 5-year inspections, but they're in a position to do so, you know, that they can go ahead and do that as soon as possible. So I'd like to make a motion that we put that forward as the first recommendation.
We had a lot of we don't use strict parliamentary procedure in the working group, but I do believe we've had a lot of discussion about that in the past, and it was I believe we all agree that it was a mistake in the drafting and not what we intended, because we certainly don't want a district that was on top of things and actually did their 5-year inspection to now be penalized by not having that count and having to do it again. That was not our intention. So I think that's a great recommendation. And if there's anyone who wants to add their comments on that or wants to disagree, you should speak up now. And then I think we can move that into our recommendations list. Go ahead, Matt.
I would just yes and for Lou and suggest that you make the effective date the date that the first legislation was passed, calling for the 5-year inspection. So as soon as it became a requirement to do it, should be the first time that we would accept it, is my suggestion.
Agreed.
Great. Any disagreement with that? I do believe when we did it too, didn't we? And I'm just doing this from my memory. I apologize. I didn't read the statute again, but I do think we also, didn't we recognize that in some recent construction projects, the requirements of inspection may have been met by the development of the project itself? Wasn't there something?
The commissioning, yeah. So the commissioning project could potentially qualify for it. I think the data from that commissioning might just need to be formatted in a different way in order to be submitted. But if the project was done and it was commissioned, that's the ideal and intent. It's really just kind of what kind of box you put it in, I think, and just making sure that that box is compliant with the requirements of statute should not be a big lift for anybody who's already done a project. They don't need to redo it, is what I'm saying.
And I think we might want to look at the language of the statute so that, people who are in that situation would understand that they'd already complied, even if they have to fill out a form that the data that they originally generated for the plans is acceptable. So we might want to look at that just so that we tie this up nicely and don't come back in next year and say, oh, now we have a problem with the new school that was built and they think they have to do a 5-year inspection. Great. Should we move back to Lou? Lou, do you have other recommendations?
We have one or two others. I'm happy to let somebody else kind of put that forward. I want to take up all the glory here.
Well, I wasn't attributing a lot of glory to you, Lou, anyway. So just kidding.
We have been talking about as well. There have been some, I guess, variation in terms of the success that folks have had with the 1-year inspection. We had talked about we'd like to recommend some changes to the inspection checklists that are related to the tools for schools piece. And it seems to be that it might make sense to actually revisit those pieces periodically. There's also some language in there in the current law that directs DAS or that enables DAS, I think is probably a more accurate way to put it, to work with subject matter experts on this. And so we'd like to see that happening. It's kind of a formal process to revisit those not applications, but those checklists on a biannual basis or something along those lines to make sure that they're giving districts what they need, or at least asking the right questions that need to be asked. So I think that would be another. Maybe I haven't perfectly captured that, but if others want to chime in here, that'd be helpful.
I've been involved in a lot of phone calls with people asking about how to do their 1-year checklists and walkthroughs and inspections. I help them the best I can, even though that's not my business to do. And I do hear a lot of concern about trying to be compliant. And I think that we could polish those checklists very well. And I think it does make sense to periodically update them to make sure that all of the information is current and accurate and what we're looking for. also, frankly, in line with all of our current statutes. There's statutes for green cleaning and bus idling that aren't necessarily represented in the checklist forms that we have, which are based on tools for schools. So making sure that people are educated about how to fill that out, making sure that the forms are accurate. Some of the things that we do for our 5-year test might be included on the 1-year form, and that doesn't need to be there. Just because you did your radon testing last year doesn't mean you have to do it again this year, even though the form asks you, did you do your radon test? Well, the answer is still yes, but we just have to make sure that they're formatted and set up in a way that doesn't make people think they need to do additional work. We want to make this as easy as possible for people to be compliant and not confuse them. So regular updates of that and review of that with the people that are involved in it all the time, I think is a fantastic idea.
So let me ask a question, Melissa. Do you think that that would require some legislative action on our part, or is that something that DAS can do based on this working group's recommendation?
Are you saying would the working with subject matter experts require legislative action?
And to do that, well, I think it's already
happy to work with you all on updates to the forms. That being said, I just want to remind you that the way the statute is written, it requires school districts to use the tools for schools. So if you're referencing that those forms are outdated, if the tools for schools forms are outdated, the education statutes require the school districts to use those forms. But we're happy to update our DAS form if you have ideas for changing the statutes or legislative proposal to make it more straightforward. Also happy to weigh in on that, so what makes sense. And I just wonder out loud, should this require school districts to do like a tools for schools program instead of just simply our checklists? So just throwing that out there for you all to think about. But we can work with the subject matter experts without a statutory change, but that doesn't change what is required of the school districts.
So any thoughts on that from the folks who are doing this work? And when you say, Melissa, doing the tools for schools program instead of just doing the checklist, I believe that originally tools for schools did involve more than just the checklist, right? There were ways in which the committee that was going to carry out the inspection was also trained to look for certain things, correct?
Yes, I believe so, but
I see Jan is not in her head, and I think Jan, probably you are in a position of administering this stuff, right?
Yeah, there was training. It was a fully coordinated program from the state, and so it was very robust. And over time, and eventually that there became no support for it. So reinstituting tools for schools, while I wouldn't object to it, theoretically, it sounds like a really great idea. And it's such an inclusive process that I know we enjoyed being part of that process, but it would require staff, time, money, and I don't know where the training would come from, because it is a little bit more complicated than just walking around a building with a clipboard.
And I believe that was done, you guys, I wasn't around, but I remember Kenny Fusco having administered that through DPH, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Kenny's actually, my understanding is Kenny's now doing some contracting work with some of the school districts directly and providing some training services on that, which is good. but there's obviously a lot of school districts that are going to need that.
I see. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thanks, Senator. And I just want to remind the group that the statute says that the district shall provide for a uniform inspection and evaluation program of indoor air quality within such buildings using Tools for Schools, which is why we are using those Tools for Schools checklists as part of our DAS form, because the statute requires DAS to create a form. It requires the school districts to do this uniform inspection and evaluation using Tools for Schools, using the DAS form. So that's our attempt to link those two things together. And as I think you know, Senator, but resharing for the group, we don't have subject matter expertise within DAS when it comes to Tools for Schools or indoor air quality. So happy to rely on subject matter experts within this group if you have any suggestions for improvements.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the real issue and we appreciate the DAS stepped up and did. I certainly recall all of the stress that was surrounded the issue of who was going to maintain the information and issue the checklist. And but DPH does not have the funding to administer the Tools for Schools program, as I understand it. Yet we're still requiring that in statute of the district. So there's a bit of a conflict there. I saw Matt's hand go up and then John.
So I think it's important to understand that Tools for Schools is not a prescriptive program. Tools for Schools is kind of an umbrella that encompasses everything related to the IAQ umbrella inside of a school environment. And so any or all of it may or may not be appropriate for any given school. You can't worry about your chillers if you don't have a chiller at the school, right? So there's a checklist for a chiller. Obviously, that's not going to be appropriate for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of program. And I think the reason to have subject matter experts help out with this is that even the forms that I think we currently have that DAS has pulled from the EPA Tools for Schools program could be modified to comply with all of the requirements we have in statute, and to say, hey, this ventilation checklist, 50% or 70% of the stuff on there is covered by my 5-year inspection. I don't necessarily need to do that every year. The intention's not for the custodian to go on the roof with sophisticated equipment and measure ventilation rates. That's something that we're covering in our 5-year inspection. So anything that we could do to kind of take away that ambiguity and take away some of the questions from the districts performing this is going to stop the phone from ringing at DAS when they're trying to figure it out too. So we're certainly willing and hopeful to work with you in that regard.
Great. John?
So one thought, that as the money is available for projects, and we want these projects to also then create a system to evaluate projects and to maintain the buildings. And we keep talking about subject matter experts. Does the current legislation allow DAS to use some of this bonding money to get their subject matter experts to create a Connecticut Tools for Schools revised or some other methodologies? Is the bonding something that could be used for that project to help create the system? Since DAS doesn't have the resources, or almost any state agency doesn't have the resources. And it wouldn't be a lot of money, but it would then create a statewide benchmark. And if we have resources available, it might be wise to ask the question, is it appropriate? And if not, then tweak the legislative language to allow it to be done, to really get a statewide standard that is really what we need, not just a Tools for Schools. It's a Tools for Schools plus.
Agreed. That's how you're actually getting at our last recommendation.
Okay.
which-
I'll
So
stop.
why don't you lay that out, and then I think we could discuss both. Well, although I feel like Melissa's question about whether folks that are subject matter experts on this call can help and work with DAS, and I think we heard yes, and so that maybe that isn't so much an issue around the checklist itself, but the bigger question about that John is raising. I don't know if you want to get some more conversation on it, or Melissa, if you want to weigh in on that, because I know the problem we had originally when we wanted to use some of the grant monies that were from bonding money, when we wanted to use those to actually help districts with the cost of the 5-year inspection. We had a big discussion about that, and part of the problem with bonding is bonding is used for capital projects and not for operational costs. And I wonder if what you're talking about, John, would be considered operational costs.
Well,
And maybe I'm not saying this right, but
yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I think there's a difference here. When you need subject matter experts, like when you're designing a bridge, you have to hire an architect. What we really need is those professional people who understand kind of HVAC and could develop a statewide framework that's more detailed than Tools for Schools, which has lots of other purposes, and one of them happens to be some HVAC stuff. So that could be a benchmark, but I think what we want is a higher standard to, and maybe Lou, has more on this, so I'll stop. But I think there's a distinction here that this is more, consider this more kind of an engineer or architect, which is an appropriate one-time expense to develop the ground rules and processes. So I think it's quite different than funding schools, grant to school staff, which out of bonding.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Really, where we were going with this was just what Senator Kushner had said, which was to make that change in the language to allow for certain operational costs, specifically the inspections piece. But I think what you've said, John, makes a lot of sense. And I think we would be supportive of that as well. Actually, using some of that to design, what the long-term plan would look like. Seemed to make sense, especially in some
Which
places.
might make sense to have DPH, as DAS's administration, less so, like you said, Melissa, subject matter experts. So they're very good at administering whatever program that they've been given and excel at that. But I don't think that they should be expected to develop one from scratch either.
is there anyone from DPH on the call? I'm sorry, I don't have my list. Oh, yes, I see Amanda is here.
Hi, yes.
Amanda, do you want to weigh in on this?
Oh, well, right. Long story. Right. So yes, and I'm getting up to speed on it too, because yes, Kenny Fosco was the lead on it many moons ago. It was a very successful program when he was running it. Some of the trainings are still available on our website, for access and utilization. But as was mentioned earlier, we don't have, funding and staff able to administer that program currently. We certainly have what would be considered, I believe, SMEs for the topics. I myself am the indoor environments coordinator. I also assist with management of the radon program, having come from that program prior. We have others more specific to tox concerns, VOCs, things like that. It's, I appreciate and agree that it would take a collaborative effort of everyone. It's just a matter of how we get that to happen. And, I do believe we would be supportive of, assisting with this, as we did in the past. It's an important topic. But yeah.
I think it's particularly, an argument can be made that if we don't provide this, resource from DPH, that the investments we're making in HVAC now could be it could be problematic down the road because we're investing money to upgrade systems. And we know from past experience that one of the problems that we face, systems fail when they haven't been maintained properly. And one of the reasons for the tools for schools, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know because you've taught me this. But it just in thinking about how we present this, it is sort of a safeguard against monies being spent now on upgrading systems and only to find that in years down the road that we haven't maintained them to the degree they needed to be maintained. And so now you have to invest more money to fix them. So it makes sense, but I wonder how we would go about it with this recommendation, because what I've heard from DPH in the past is that all of this takes money. And so we would need DPH, I think, to tell us what it would cost to be the subject matter experts and to help assist with the administration of this program. So maybe that's a request to DPH to come back to us and think about that a little bit. Relatively,
yeah, I'll bring it back and yeah.
So I'm going to be rude and just jump back in and say all the more reason that we have some outside help, maybe with under the guidance of DPH, to create a even keel for or comparable system for every school district. And I apologize for not knowing how many school districts there really are, but there's probably 200 of them because of regional school districts on top of the town.
I think it's 187 or something like that, right? Okay. 187. But yeah, you're.
We don't want to have 187 different levels. We want to have where every district's trying to figure out and make their own rules and own approaches. I think we want a uniform system so that wherever you live and wherever you go to school, you have kind of the same assurances that you have the same quality standards. And that's why I'm kind of suggesting that we need more than tools for schools, more detailed approaches to even what's under this current legislation for inspections. So I just, and outside consultants, outside persons would be a one-time create the framework. So it's not bringing in another employee that then is there forever. And that's where people are concerned about the costs. Again, a lot of capital projects, you bring in a subject matter expert to guide the development of that project. So it's done all the time in state government.
So I guess the question though for me would be, and maybe Amanda and Melissa, you could help us, myself and Jen in particular. Jen is now the chair of the education committee, co-chair of the education committee, and clearly would be in a position to help us figure out how to, accomplish this through legislatively. But I think we would need your guidance to like really structure it in a way that gets to what John's talking about, in terms of where the financing would come from, and then the sort of ongoing cost of providing that assistance to the school districts. So I think that this is exactly why we want this working group to continue, because we got to figure these things out in the long run. It's going to make sense, good financial sense to do it right. So John, you weren't being rude at all.
That number you were looking for, Senator, by the way, is 197 school districts, including the regionals.
So John was even closer. Okay, great. So does that address the recommendation, and maybe takes it a little further even, that was coming from the coalition? And then Cameron, if you'll work with Jen and I, we both have pretty packed agendas, but to follow up with Amanda, if you'll take the lead on that with DPH, and then Melissa will loop you into, because you've been invaluable in keeping us on track with how money gets spent. So, are there any other recommendations we're getting? We've gone past our hour, which we're usually really good about staying within the hour, but any other recommendations we should be hearing right now?
One item just of business for this working group for when we're done with the recommendations conversation.
Okay, any other recommendations that we should be discussing? I don't see any hands, so let's go to Lou for the final item.
Final thought, we'd like to, so obviously, the realm of school environment law in Connecticut is a little bit bigger than school indoor air quality alone. There is quite a bit of overlap there on some of those policies. For one thing, we do have a school bus idling law that directly impacts what we've been talking about. We also have a green cleaning law that many districts really don't understand as well. And it does impact, it can impact air quality as well if that green cleaning law is not being implemented properly. And so we've been discussing this, and we thought it would be extremely helpful if either the chairs or through the working group, however we would have to do this, if we could make an inquiry so that we could have a summary of all of the state laws related to indoor and school environments. So that we could have a conversation about that as part of our ongoing work with the working group, not necessarily something that we want to make a recommendation around this year.
So, just off the top of my head, we could reach out to OLR to help us put together that list of statutes that apply to schools and could touch on the indoor air quality the way you've mentioned it. So maybe we would set up a meeting with OLR. I'm sure, especially the way you framed it, I particularly like that we're not talking about needing that for this legislative session, because I know OLR is really deeply, they're working very hard right now just to keep up with all the legislation that's been proposed. And the changes in legislation as they occur, OLR is heavily relied upon to summarize and for all of our JF meetings. So it's something we could ask them to do, but I think it, might make sense to start that process with the understanding it's not something that is immediate.
That'd be fine.
Matt?
I know we're running late, so I'll be really quick. I think what Lou suggested dovetails very well with everything we're talking about with this recommendation. And so if the recommendation, when they talk about a combination of DPH and DAS getting together to more accurately have our indoor air quality program reflective of all of the laws of the state, might be the way to kind of come across that. And so Tools for Schools is one portion of that. Like Lou said, there's lots of other portions. And so having all of that kind of information centralized and accessible by the municipalities that want to be compliant, I think should be the ultimate goal if we spend some money, as John suggests, about making sure that this is a comprehensive program and not just a comprehensive Tools for Schools program, but with all of the indoor air and environmental laws for schools that we have currently.
I agree completely. Thank you.
Okay, that seems like these things all, as you say, fit together. So it's ambitious, but so we have we have some things that we need to do immediately, but we also have some more long-term goals. So I think if there's nothing else for today, Cameron will provide the notes for me and for Representative Bleeper, and she and I will try and get together on this to see what we can do, and we'll certainly reach out to both
DAS and DPH. So thank you very much for being here tonight, all of you. It's a good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you for the indulgence. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Senator. Thanks for
Take care.
representing.